4 days after an explosive investigative documentary made allegations against high-ranking government officials in Zimbabwe, many are still waiting to see if there will be consequences and accountability. But there does seem to be some action. Zimbabwe's Financial Intelligence Unit has announced that it is investigating Hubert Angel, a prosperity preacher, presidential envoy, and as well an ambassador at large for Zimbabwe. Also under investigation is gold dealer Ewan McMillan on allegations of money laundering. Now, this investigation follows an Al Jazeera documentary which shows the men engaged in what appears to be illicit activities around Zimbabwe's gold trade. The FIU has instructed the Insurance and Pensions Commission to get as much information as possible from the insurance industry players on Angel and McMillan's insured assets held or disposed by the two, directly or indirectly, through companies or trusts for the period between January the 1st, 2020 and March 21st, 2023. They are not the only ones implicated in the documentary. President Emerson Mnangagwa's niece, Henrietta Rishwaga, president of Zimbabwe's Mining Association, is also caught up in the scandal. Now joining me from Harare, Zimbabwe is Dr. Prosper Chitambara, Developmental Economist. Dr. Chitambara, welcome again to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
So while the documentary seems to have come to many people, or at least the information in the documentary has come to many people as a surprise, and I just recently watched it as well, do the allegations, especially when it comes to the gold trade in Zimbabwe and the movement of these illicit funds, do they come to you and many Zimbabweans as a surprise?
Well, over the past years, we've always heard allegations of rampant gold smuggling, especially within the gold sector. So I think this is really part of that plethora of allegations that we've actually had over the past. Even estimates from the central bank have actually shown that on an annual basis we are losing as much as 2 billion through smuggling of crucial minerals, key of which is gold. So I think these allegations don't really surprise us because I think we've lived with such allegations for a number of years.
So you talk about the smuggling of key minerals, particularly gold. In the documentary, it mentions, of course, how this gold is mined by small-scale farmers, artisanal miners, in very dangerous conditions, and then it's moved by briefcases with interesting people from across the continent, and of course also from South Africa, involving a Kenyan or so. When you look at the how of it, if this is something that's been going on for so long, why does it seem it takes a documentary to sort of shine the spotlight on the situation?
Well, I think the major challenge really has been that even from evidence from some information that we have received from the central bank, for example, it's really the politically exposed persons who have allegedly been behind a lot of this smuggling of these minerals. And there's also obviously a lot of opacity around the whole issue. And it's very difficult really to probably come up with strong evidence that can then be presented within a court of law. I think in view of the fact that some of the people that are allegedly behind this are politically exposed persons, and also the fact that it's difficult, like I said, to really nail down hard evidence, cogent evidence to be able to prosecute such allegations.
Okay, so let's stick with that. So the documentary lays out how gold is mined by small-scale miners and then moved to Dubai and changed into US dollars, hard currency, and then somehow is brought back into the country and sometimes lodged with companies said to be under the government's control. But this is a country that is under heavy sanctions. So how do you think this trade and this movement of hard American dollars from Dubai is moving back into Zimbabwe right under the noses of those who have instituted these very far-reaching sanctions?
Well, I think, like you correctly pointed out, that some have actually argued that because the country is under targeted sanctions, it has meant that the country is actually under greater scrutiny. So whoever is responsible for this smuggling, they have to devise ways and means of actually evading that international scrutiny in terms of for example, the smuggling of the gold out of the country, and also even the smuggling of this cash into the Zimbabwean economy. So it's quite complex in terms of how I believe they're actually able to evade international scrutiny, all probably in the name of trying to counter or to bust those targeted measures that have been imposed on the country.
So do you think this makes a case for sanctions to be continued or even to be stopped? Because at the end of the day, the people who are supposed to be under the sanctions, feeling the weight of the sanctions, governments and high-ranking government officials seem to be able to find their way around it. Meanwhile, the average everyday Zimbabwean is the one who's suffering, not being able to get medicine, not being able to get enough money to just make an everyday living and make the ends meet. So does this kind of documentary, when it shines this spotlight on this situation, make a case for the sanctions to be continued or not? Are they achieving their aim in the long run?
I think my view is that it makes a strong case for the sanctions really to be dropped, the targeted measures to be dropped, because they then incentivize these kind of activities, this kind of illicit activities. So I would really advocate and urge for the sanctions to be removed. And by removing them, also you are also removing any excuse that these individuals may actually have to be smuggling some of these minerals.
So we now know that the Financial Intelligence Unit wants to probe Hubert Angel, who was appointed by the president as a presidential envoy and ambassador at large for Zimbabwe to Europe and the Americas. The IFU is also looking into Angel and Ewan McMillan's, I beg your pardon, insured assets that are held or disposed by the two directly or indirectly through companies or trusts for a specific period of time. So let's talk about the individual who seems to be at the very center of this. He was appointed by the president as a presidential envoy and ambassador at large. He is on camera, basically walking people through how this illicit gold smuggling and money laundering would be done. What do we know about what's happening with Ambassador Hubert Angel as of right now?
Well, we haven't. I hear his team has actually released quite a long response to this first part of the documentary, but we haven't heard anything really from his mouth, from him, in terms of trying to address some of the allegations and what we've actually seen in the documentary. But of course, you could also probably argue that it's also part of his remit to be probably looking for investors. And the Second Republic, as you know, as you correctly say, that is an ambassador at large. So probably one of the remit of his assignment is to really look for investors who are willing to actually come and invest in some of the key sectors of the economy. So that would be one of the reasons that they could actually use to try to wriggle out of these very serious and damning allegations.
So interesting enough, there's a teaser for the second part of the documentary that shows him on the phone telling the person who stood as the middleman, rather, to say that he would provide access to the president at a cost of $200,000 as a facilitation fee. With the first part of what we've seen, how much implication, how much of a shadow does this cast on the president as it is right now?
I think these are very serious and quite damning allegations. And I think I would probably applaud what the Financial Intelligence Unit have really done to try to launch some kind of investigation to get to the root or to the bottom of this scam or of these allegations. But it also then puts the country under a lot of unnecessary spotlight, which could actually result probably in our gold or even other minerals actually being blacklisted. And of course, if that happens, that then also exacerbates this whole situation. That's why I think earlier on I was saying that I'm more of an advocate for the removal of the targeted measures, because once you remove them, it helps throw a lot of light in terms of our trading in these critical minerals that have been prone to rampant smuggling.
So let's go back to the FIU. In terms of what they're looking to uncover and the information they're looking to get right now, what do we think we're looking to see? They want to talk about the trust, the companies, the assets of these individuals from about 2.5, 3 years, probably looking at the time that Hubert Angel was appointed by the president till about now. What do you think could be the things that they uncover? What are they looking for when they're looking for these companies?
Well, probably they would also want to unearth or uncover how these assets have actually been acquired. Because obviously, one of the key allegations is that the proceeds from these money laundering schemes have actually been used to acquire a number of assets by the persons that are actually involved. So I think that would be one of the key questions that they would actually seek to provide answers to, in terms of some of the assets that we've seen, some of the construction projects that we've seen by some of these individuals over the past few years. Probably try to get to the bottom of the key sources of financing for those projects, those massive construction projects that we've seen over the past few years.
So this also puts a spotlight on the country's mining sector, particularly gold. And there are also allegations against the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, also allegations against the president's niece, who happens to be the president of the Zimbabwe Mining Association and Mining Group there. When we look at all of these allegations and we look at the high level of those involved, Dr. Chitambara, what do you think this tells us about how this illicit activity, whether it's the gold smuggling or the money laundering, is really going around in Zimbabwe? And there are links, of course, to a Kenyan national or an Indian man born in Kenya, as well as some South African businessmen who've also been shown in this documentary. What do you think this paints a picture of for us?
I think these allegations really, they paint the picture that I think what's happening is really a complex web, obviously with a lot of high-profile people that are actually involved. But I think it's also crucial to continue to emphasize that these are still allegations, and which would need really to be presented within a competent court and be tried, so at least we come up with a factual information and factual evidence to prove or to disprove some of these allegations. But the allegations, like I said, they are quite damning. And they really show that if they are proved to be true, they actually show that it's quite complex, and it involves obviously people that highly high-profile people within the political establishment.
What's the general sentiment of Zimbabweans since the documentary came out? The conversations and the discussions that people have been having?
Well, I think there's been quite heated conversations, especially on the social media platforms, on Twitter. I think these are the stories. This is really the story that has actually been trending. And I think the general sentiment is that these allegations, they would probably need to be addressed by even the highest political office. We've seen such allegations in other countries actually leading to quite massive consequences. So I think the general mood that I'm sensing from what I've been reading and hearing is that probably the politicians might need to come out in the open and directly address these allegations, or probably even come up with some commission of inquiry to really get into the bottom of all this complex web of allegations of smuggling and money laundering that have actually been unearthed in this documentary.
But do you think Zimbabweans would really trust a probe into this that leads to the highest office in the land, an ambassador appointed by the president, his niece possibly implicated? We're hearing that in the second part of the documentary, the First Lady of Zimbabwe may also be implicated. Do you think Zimbabweans would trust a probe by the Financial Intelligence Unit or a commission of inquiry, seeing how high this possibly could go?
No, I think that's an important observation. Like I'm highlighting that even the Financial Intelligence Unit is really part of the central bank, and our central bank is not independent. It's not as strongly independent as other central banks. So there's a lot of obviously political interferences within the central bank. So, well, it's really difficult ideally, probably an international body would be better placed to probably probe some of these allegations. But I'm not sure that the government would be agreeable to an independent body coming in to try to get to the bottom of this. But obviously, those are very legitimate concerns that probably these war investigations by the FIU will not lead to anything, especially seeing that these allegations could also implicate very, very high people within the political establishment.
All right, Dr. Chitambara, before I let you go, this is the first of a 4-part series that apparently Al Jazeera has put together. And many are wondering if the first part left a lot of people, including myself, saying, what could we possibly be seeing in the next 2, 3, and the 4th rounding up? In terms of the allegations and the players involved, what do you think really at the end may actually come out of all of this?
Well, I don't think we expect much to come out of this. Like you say, that most of the institutions really that are supposed to be independently probing this are not independent institutions. They are directly under the control of government, which is a ZANU-PF-led government. So no matter how damning the allegations may be, even at the end of the 4th part of the documentary, I don't think we are going to, it's going to result in any major accountability or any major fallout in terms of the people that are allegedly implicated in this war scam. So I think that's the challenge that we actually have. I don't think this will lead to anything in terms of holding people accountable for these serious allegations that have actually been raised.
All right, Dr. Prosper Chitambara, we'll leave it at that. Unfortunately, many of us will be waiting to see more, but more importantly, I know Zimbabweans will be hoping to see some level of accountability and consequences and an investigation at the least to see what comes of it. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me, as always.
All right. And there are a number of individuals involved in what has become a very damning controversy right now and scandal in Zimbabwe. The president's niece, who is the president of the Zimbabwe Mining Association. We also have a man who was appointed by the president as presidential envoy and ambassador at large for Zimbabwe to Europe and the Americas. There's also a man known as the Preacher, an Indian who was born in Kenya, did some work for the Kenyan government, and at one point made $600 million from a deal with the Kenyan government. So while this story may be based and focusing on the illicit gold trade in Zimbabwe, there are connections to Kenya. There are also connections to businessmen in South Africa. Will there be consequences? Will there be accountability for what seems to be money laundering, gold trading illicitly, and of course, denying the people of Zimbabwe their due? It's a conversation that will continue as the remaining parts of the documentary are released.